from becoming the most notorious gangster in South Boston's history to his violent death behind bars. Here are 13 things you need to know about Whitey Bulger. Before we begin, be sure to subscribe to They Will Kill You. Hit the like button and request any topics you'd like to learn about in the comments section below. Number 13. Early life. James Joseph Bulger Jr., better known as Whitey Bulger, was born on September 3, 1929. His mother was a first-generation Irish immigrant, and his father was a union laborer and longshoreman who'd come to America from Canada. After James Joseph Sr. lost his arm in an industrial accident, the Bulger family was living in poverty. In 1938, they moved to the projects in South Boston. While his younger brothers, William and John, did very well in school, Bulger preferred the street life. He began his criminal career in his early teens. Number 12. First arrest. In South Boston, Bulger made a name for himself as a street fighter and a thief. Before long, seasoned criminals began taking note of his activities. He joined a street gang that went by the Shamrocks and landed his first larceny charge at the age of 14. The nickname Whitey was given to him by local law enforcement because of his white blonde hair. Bulger reportedly hated it, as he preferred to be called Jimmy, Jim, or Boots on account of his habit of wearing cowboy boots and concealing a switchblade in them. Regardless, for the rest of his criminal career he would be known as Whitey. Bulger was eventually sent to a juvenile detention center for various crimes including forgery, assault, and armed robbery. Number 11. U.S. Air Force. Following his release, Bulger joined the U.S. Air Force in 1948. He was first stationed at Smoky Hill Air Force Base in Salina, Kansas. Even though he was honorably discharged 4 years later, his conduct in the Air Force was reflective of his criminal past. On several occasions, he was sent to the stockade on assault charges, and in 1950, Air Force police arrested him after he'd gone AWOL. In 1952, Bulger returned to Boston and soon resumed his criminal activity with a string of bank robberies. Number 10. Involvement in the MK Ultra program. Bulger was sent to the Atlanta State Penitentiary in 1956 after he was arrested for armed robbery and truck hijacking. For a period of time, he volunteered alongside 18 other inmates for a CIA research program. The inmates had participated in exchange for reduced sentences and had been told that they were helping to find a cure for schizophrenia. The program was called MK Ultra, and it was actually a covert government operation experimenting with mind control through various chemicals and methodologies. It was officially halted in 1973 out of concerns for its legitimacy and practices, some of which were reportedly akin to torture. In the controversial program, the inmates were frequently given LSD and other drugs meant to manipulate their mental states. According to Bulger, the experience was like a nightmare that took him to the depths of insanity. He began hearing voices and feared that he would be permanently sent to a mental facility if he'd tell anyone. He would dread the thought of taking another dose of LSD. This went on for 18 months. Number 9. Alcatraz. In 1959, Bulger was transferred from USP Atlanta to Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary after allegedly planning a prison escape. At the time, Alcatraz was one of the most notorious prisons in the country and housed some of its most dangerous gangsters, such as Alvin Karpis or Mickey Cohen. Yet Bulger looked back at his 3-year stint on the rock with a sense of nostalgia. At one point, he wrote to Alcatraz historian Michael Esslinger, "If I could choose my epitaph on my tombstone, it would be, I'd rather be in Alcatraz." Years after he was released, while he was on the run from the FBI, Bulger visited Alcatraz as a tourist. He even took a photo in mock prison garb alongside then-girlfriend Teresa Stanley, despite being the world's most wanted fugitive at the time. Number 8. Rise to prominence. In 1965, Bulger's petition for parole was granted and he was released from Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary. He wouldn't see the inside of a prison cell for the next 46 years. First, he worked as a loan shark for Donald Killeen. who'd been the leader of the South Boston mob for over 2 decades. Bulger rose through the ranks of South Boston's criminal underground at a time of gang war between the Killeen mob and their rivals, the Mullen Gang. During this time, Bulger set out to commit his first murder. He tried to kill one of the leaders of the Mullen Gang, but ended up shooting his law-abiding brother instead, in a case of mistaken identity. As the younger Mullen Gang outmaneuvered the Killeen brothers, Bulger soon realized that he was on the losing side. It was reported that at one point, he secretly approached Howie Winter, boss of the Winter Hill Gang, telling him that he would end the war by killing the leaders of the Killeen Gang. Shortly afterwards, Donald Killeen was gunned down in front of his house. It's still disputed whether Bulger was responsible for the hit, but he ultimately took Killeen's place. He joined forces with the Mullen Gang, and Howie Winter, who had mediated the truce, became the overall boss. The dispute was also mediated by Joseph Russo, a made man of the Patriarca crime family. Number 7. Manipulation of the FBI. One of the reasons Bulger's criminal enterprise operated for as long as it did was that he'd managed to manipulate the Federal Bureau of Investigation and compromise several agents, most notably Special Agent John Connolly. As Howie Winter put it, the highly intelligent Bulger could teach the devil tricks. He took out the opposition by convincing Winter to sanction hits on those that stepped out of line. The leaders of the Mullen Gang soon became Bulger's victims. He partnered up with Italian-American gangster Stephen the Rifleman Flemmy, who was an FBI informant and soon followed his example. Special Agent John Connolly recruited Bulger as an FBI informant in 1975 and promised to help him against the Patriarca family, who Bulger had been feuding with. Connolly, who was 10 years younger than Bulger, had grown up in the same South Boston projects. He'd idolized Bulger as a child. As a teenager, Bulger even chased away a group of bullies that were beating Connolly up. He became the mob boss's guardian angel in the FBI, alerting him to investigations, accepting bribes, and falsifying reports to cover his crimes. In December 1977, FBI agent John Morris was put in charge of the FBI's organized crime squad at the Boston field office. Not only did he fail to stop Connolly from protecting Bulger, but he soon became his accomplice. Even though Morris was later transferred to the drug task force, he remained Bulger's and Connolly's accomplice. This ultimately meant that for years, the FBI ignored his criminal organization. Bulger later made it a point of affirming that he wasn't an informant, but a strategist who made sure to never give the FBI anything of value while still reaping in all the benefits of the corrupt relationship. Aside from the people protecting Bulger in the FBI, his organization also had corrupt officers within the Boston Police Department and a source in the Massachusetts State Police, Lieutenant Richard J. Snyderhan. Number 6. Organized crime boss. Howie Winter and members of his inner circle were arrested in September 1979, and the subsequent power vacuum was filled by Bulger and Flemmy, who were still moonlighting as FBI informants. They were supposed to be indicted along with Winter, but at the last minute, Connolly and Morris persuaded the prosecutor to drop the charges against them. Bulger and Flemmy took over the Winter Hill Gang and eliminated most of their rivals using their status as informants. After a RICO charge basically dismantled the Patriarca family's operations, Bulger, as the head of the Winter Hill Gang, was the new crime boss of Boston. Number 5. Bulger's Code. Whitey Bulger was ruthless and didn't hesitate to take out anyone that opposed him. He was convicted for the murder of 11 people, but was suspected of having killed 8 more. The victims included drug dealers, potential witnesses to his crimes, or FBI informants, some of whom were pointed out to him by Connolly. However, according to Kevin Weeks, Bulger's friend and top lieutenant, he had a code. Weeks once stated, as a criminal, he made it a point of only preying upon criminals, as opposed to legitimate people. During his reign in South Boston, he forbade the trafficking of heroin and angel dust. He also didn't allow selling drugs to children. Weeks also mentioned that Bulger didn't hesitate to use violence and that he'd kill those he thought would come back to cause him harm. Number 4. Criminal activity. During the 1980s, Bulger's criminal empire grew throughout eastern Massachusetts and operated various rackets such as extortion, bookmaking, loan sharking, truck hijackings, and arms trafficking. All the case-building attempts against Bulger and his inner circle, both at state and federal level, were hindered by a number of factors. These included corruption within the FBI, Massachusetts State Police, and the Boston Police Department, as well as South Boston's Code of Silence. Some argue that Bulger also benefited from some protection because his brother William was president of the Massachusetts Senate while he was building his organization. However, aside from a conversation between them while Bulger was a fugitive, a truly incriminating connection was never officially established. Publicly, Whitey Bulger was mostly seen as a man who'd never forgotten his neighborhood, despite his rise to riches. However, it was common knowledge that people who crossed him ended up dead. According to Weeks, Bulger made over $30 million by extorting drug dealers. He would summon each dealer to his headquarters and demanded a substantial cash payment as the price for not killing them, after alleging that someone had ordered their assassination. Bulger imposed a weekly protection tax on dealers, and anyone who wanted to sell drugs in South Boston had to pay the price. Bulger bought and shipped weapons to the IRA, including C4 explosives, grenades, rocket heads, hundreds of firearms, and thousands of ammunition rounds. From the very start of his cooperation with the FBI, he made it clear that he'd never disclose anything on the IRA. Aside from other criminal activities, it's believed that Bulger and his associates also illegitimately obtained the winning $14 million ticket in Massachusetts State Lottery. Number 3. Fugitive. Apprehending Bulger, Fleming, or Weeks was difficult because they were extremely cautious of wiretaps and never discussed business in the car or over the telephone. Bulger was reportedly always ready to go on the run on short notice. The FBI, considered compromised, was not informed when the DEA, aided by state and local police, started probing Bulger's gambling operation. A federal case was built against him under the RICO Act after several bookmakers testified they'd paid Bulger protection money. In 1994, after learning from Connolly that the FBI was planning to arrest him on indictments that had come from the Department of Justice, Bulger became a fugitive. Weeks, who became the head of the Winter Hill Gang, was arrested in 1999. He subsequently cut a deal that revealed everything about Bulger and the gang's operations. Number 2. Capture. Bulger spent 16 years on the run. For a long time, he was at the top of the FBI's most wanted list, second only to Osama bin Laden. A $2 million reward was offered for information leading to his capture. Bulger and girlfriend Catherine Gregg were found living under assumed identities in an apartment close to a beach in Santa Monica. The tip that led to Bulger's arrest had come from 1974 Miss Iceland, Anna Bjorn, who lived in his neighborhood. In the apartment, authorities found fake IDs, 30 firearms, and over $800,000 in cash. Bulger, who was 81 at the time of his arrest, was found guilty on 31 of the 32 counts of firearms possession and racketeering. He was sentenced to 2 terms of life imprisonment with an additional 5 years. Number 1. Death. On October 30th, 2018, Bulger was found unresponsive in a wheelchair at West Virginia's United States Penitentiary, Hazleton, the morning after he'd been transferred. The 89-year-old former mob boss had been beaten to death by several prisoners with a padlock wrapped in a sock. He'd also been attacked with a shiv. Bulger's tongue had been nearly cut out and his eyes were almost gouged out. The main suspect for orchestrating the hit was Photius Freddy Gears, a Massachusetts-based mafia hitman. Gears didn't deny his involvement. Whitey Bulger was buried at St. Joseph's Cemetery in Boston next to his parents. His funeral mass was attended, among other family members, by his brother William. Thanks for watching. Which do you think was the most interesting fact about Whitey Bulger? Let us know in the comments section below.